Hello everyone, my name is Matt Florestano and the topic that I researched was dyscalculia. I'm just going to give you a general overview of what dyscalculia is, give you some tips for diagnosing it in our students, just some consequences and causes of dyscalculia, and some simple ways to intervene and give these students help so that they can be successful. Dyscalculia is a mathematical learning disability. This disability can present itself alone, or it can be found with other disabilities. A common one that goes with dyscalculia is dyslexia, and this can be really challenging for students to understand the symbols, the mathematical symbols, and what the problems are asking. Dyscalculia has a wide variety of types. Areas that students can struggle in math can be in the calculations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, working with fractions, long division, algebraic skills, anything like that. Spatial confusion can be especially challenging too if there's shapes and graphs and lines, and students need to check their answers based on these shapes and these drawings, and they have a poor understanding of length and greater than or less than in these shapes, they'll have a pretty significant barrier to solving those kinds of problems. And learning the math facts and procedures, that basically can wreck a student's entire understanding of a certain concept within math. That's why the spiraling review is important, that teachers continue to emphasize things that were learned earlier, because the math builds on itself as very much a scaffolding subject. And an inability to recognize patterns, which patterns are often a way that teachers use to help kids learn things. So teachers need to recognize that you can't just teach different concepts in math just based on patterns, because there are some students that simply cannot learn that way. As far as diagnosing dyscalculia, we have to compare students' grades in other subjects to their math grades. To do this, you can collaborate with other teachers and talk to them about how they're doing in their classes for specific students, and you can also look at standardized tests. In these standardized tests, if students are more than 2 years below where their actual age says they should be in a math subject, then that's cause for concern. Additionally, you can look at how the student does during class time, during lessons. Are they participating in asking questions and answering questions during the lesson, or are they struggling to keep up with the notes, and it seems like they have glazed over looks? And obviously you want that for all of your students, you want to counter that, but these are especially things to observe for looking for dyscalculia. And then there's some more formal tests that kids can take to really determine if they have it or not. The complex figures test looks a lot like there's a drawing that students will look at for a brief period of time, and then they will try to draw it themselves from memory, and then they will also get a chance to look at it directly and make a copy of it. And comparing the copy of what they drew and what they drew from memory will help determine how their spatial orientation is with lines and angles and lengths and areas. Also, the Dyscalculia screener is probably the most practical, and if you have students go through the procedures on this Dyscalculia screener, then that'll be the best way to see if they need help and if they actually need special education resources like aids and IEPs and whatnot. There's a link for that right below. Here's an example of the kind of problem that a student who you might think has dyscalculia will look at on one of these tests to determine if they have it or not. And it's pretty self-explanatory below here. Uh, Obviously, the 3 is taller than the 8, and the 9 is greater than the 7. But an important thing to remember here is that if students aren't taught what greater than or less than actually means in mathematics, then that can contribute to this problem, um, and basically make students dyscalculic in this area. And it is not all hereditary. It's a lot of environmental factors go into dyscalculia, as we'll talk about next. Many people are either right-brained or left-brained, and this can determine some of what a person is capable of as far as logical reasoning and calculating things. But many people are a good mix of both, and there's far more going on with environmental factors when it comes to those with dyscalculia. There's the math anxiety, which is a learned trait. Students have just had failure after failure, and it wasn't this problem wasn't solved in a helpful way by whoever was in charge of that learning, and they just have no confidence anymore in their math skills. There's the poor reading skills that if a student can't read a problem and know what the problem is asking, if it's in some kind of text form, then they're going to have no chance to even try to put what they know from the math of the problem into practice, and you've set them up for failure already. A lack of knowledge of math facts and a common sense about numbers, that can also be a huge block to when students at the higher levels of math are trying to do algebraic problems and solving systems of equations and graphing and finding different values in geometry. All of that will be quite difficult if the students don't have basic knowledge of rules and what different operations do. Some difficulty in everyday life that can come from dyscalculia can be anywhere from having difficulty with measurements, preparing food, or creating something, carpentry, anything, telling time, being on time for things, knowing your time constraints for different projects. And then grocery shopping. Say if students don't know how many quarts are in a gallon of milk or something, or how many ounces are in a pound, they need to know the different like the metric system and the old English system of measurements. That's something that needs to be taught. And if students are having trouble with those things, it can be rather embarrassing and hindering at times in everyday life. And there's also, if students are struggling with math, that can bar them in other subjects like science and anything that uses logical reasoning. And there's also the criticism from peers that can be detrimental to a student's self-esteem as a result of dyscalculia. But here are some strategies that we can put into our classrooms that can alleviate some of these negative effects of dyscalculia. We can try to get rid of their fear of math, their tendency to believe that they just can't do it. We can give them tools to look at problems different ways, help them with calculations with calculators and just manipulatives and different fun games that kids can play to help them better understand concepts. We can also change our instruction to benefit pretty much all students, but this is especially important with students with dyscalculia. And then give students plenty of time to practice the things that we've taught them. A very helpful way to begin any class for a year is basically to give your students the expectation that you want your classroom to be an environment where students aren't being judged based on who they are. If there's anything we're going to critique, it's going to be procedure, how we solve problems, what the correct answers are, factual things, not people's ability. And also teach these students that the amount of work that they put in will determine their success. And at the beginning, you may have a student with dyscalculia who simply will just not think that they're capable of being successful in math at all. But if you really reinforce the students to, and even change your grading, alter your grading to reward them for the work shown and the amount of work they put in, then that builds their self-esteem, and that will lead to more success and eventually some self-efficacy in math, and that will do a great amount in alleviating dyscalculia. Here are some of the manipulatives that I'm sure most of us have seen before in the math classroom. There's some calculations that we have to do, like finding the inverse of different trigonometric functions, where calculators are just sensible to use. And then there's some students that will need it for simple things like multiplying and dividing and adding and subtracting. And while we want to give them practice with that by hand and in their heads, we also want to have this available so they're not falling behind. Geometer's Sketchpad is especially helpful when we're looking at different shapes and seeing how their properties change when different angles and sides are congruent, or if they're altered in any way. It's just a great tool for proving things and showing students why different rules in geometry are there. It's also quite helpful to have posters and reminders around your room to remind students of different procedures for different concepts in math. We have like the PEMDAS acronym, PEMDAS, and that gives students the order, and if they're trying to calculate out some value, they're going to calculate the thing in parentheses, the items in parentheses, then the exponential items, then they'll multiply, then divide, then add and subtract, which is crucial for being accurate with your answers and calculations. And finally, compasses, anything to do with geometry. It's good to have students visually see what their shapes are coming out to and having them construct them on their own. It's really important to break up instruction with practice time in between instruction. Have students discover their own what they see to be true in the math. Change the format of the word problems. We want to have less paragraphs and have the word problems broken up into different parts. What the problem is, what the values are, and what it's asking of the student. And just have a lot of communication throughout the lesson. Make sure that these students with dyscalculia are keeping up and are at least comprehending most of what you're going over. And then give them plenty of practice time. The more they practice, the more they're going to succeed, and the more they succeed, the better they're going to believe they are at math, and that's half the battle right there. It's important to assign the work that they're going to be graded on later in homework. You want to give them homework that's like their tests, and give them enough to really understand it well, but not too much where they fall behind. And then also use the resources that are given to you through SPED for your school district, and provide tutors when you can as well. Just give them all the tools that they're going to need.